Iran and the U.S. held indirect talks in Oman on Saturday that lasted for more than 2 hours. In the first top-level conversation between the nations since 2022, they discussed Tehran's nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff spoke briefly after the talks. Now, joining us now is Burcu Ozcelik, Senior Research Fellow for Middle East Security at Rusi. Both sides described the talks of the weekend as, quote, constructive, hinting that there may be a continuation of talks to come, perhaps in the next week or so. Did we learn anything more about what may be included in the scope of a potential deal if it does come to fruition?
Well, good morning. I think what we've learned so far is that, as you've said, this seems to have laid the groundwork for future talks. So this is the beginning of more conversations to be had over the next few weeks and potentially months. The issue is that we don't know enough about what exactly was discussed, but it appears to be promising in that the U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, doesn't look like he demanded anything that the Iranians would say that is a red line. We are not taking this any further, and vice versa. So this appears to have been a good first step, but the real work must begin now and as soon as later this week is what we're hearing.
And of course, this is the very same president who pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA back in 2018. What is incentivizing President Trump to return back to the table again? And of course, it was only after 2018 that Iran accelerated the uranium enrichment process. So why does President Trump want a deal this time around?
I think there are motivations on both sides. The timing seems to be ripe for a deal to be had. There are skeptics on both sides, certainly, and still a potential for spoilers who see more of a disadvantage to pursuing a deal. Iran has been severely weakened over the course of the past 18 months in the war in the region, of course. And so for many hardliners and the conservatives, and also for mainly Israel as a state actor in the region, this seems to be a time to really go after, in more harsher terms, Iran's nuclear program. But in terms of why it's a good opportunity for a deal, President Trump, I think he is in need of a win right now, and an agreement where Iran, in principle, perhaps would agree to not pursue the possession of a nuclear weapon or the weaponization program. This might offer a low-hanging fruit in terms of a win for President Trump's team, but it will be very difficult to get to that point. So this actually is not an easy one on which to get a win. It's highly technical. It will be a complicated, complex process. But it just depends on what the United States is willing to count as a win on this.
Yeah, but again, going back to what I said, they're so close to being able to create a nuclear bomb, an atomic bomb. And that's why many critics and more hawkish voices, and of course Israel, have called for a complete dismantling of the nuclear program, something that Iran has said is a non-starter. How likely is it that if there is an agreement, there's going to be sufficient monitoring in place that would satisfy the hawks' demands?
Well, Iran has been crippled economically. The impact of the U.S. primary and secondary sanctions have been severe in the lives of ordinary Iranians. So there is upward pressure from the grassroots level on the Iranian regime to be able to come home with a package of sanctions relief. So this is serious in terms of the popular demand. Views, of course, are divided inside Iran as well, both at the public level and across the political establishment. But in terms of the desire for a deal, I think there is sufficient momentum there. But Iran would have to make, the officials would have to make certain concessions, agree to strict verification and monitoring mechanisms, reducing its stockpile of enriched uranium, and agreeing not to pursue weaponization. Whether the Trump administration's team adds other provisions to what a deal would look like, such as Iran's ballistic missile program, its support for regional proxies, that's yet to be determined. But it seems for now the messaging from Washington is that this is going to be a more narrow scope for negotiations that focuses on Iran's willingness to step back from weaponization.